I'm not a loud man, not the kind who wears his pain on his sleeve like a neon sign. I'm the kind who notices the small cracks in a wall and the way a room's air changes when someone walks through it, the way the clock seems to tick a little louder when the truth sits in the corner and refuses to be soothed by polite conversation. I'm the kind who believes that the best way to survive a storm is to stand still long enough to understand the weather, then move with the wind rather than against it. That's who I was, before the earth shifted under our feet, and a confession I didn't intend to hear landed like a rock in the quiet pool of our life. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 38, a reporter for a local newspaper that has more coffee-stained margins than actual news, and a husband who believed in routine as if routine were a pillar holding us upright. We had been married for 12 years when the first sign of trouble started to flicker in the corner of my eye, the way a street lamp flickers when a winter storm is moving in. Uneasy, unsteady, not yet fully awake to the fact that it's about to be the center of attention. Her name was Jessica. She had the kind of smile that could coax a stubborn morning out of bed and a tongue that could deliver a truth with a velvet glove. Soft, almost gentle, but with a quick, certain sting if you happened to be listening too closely. We met in college, when both of us were younger than our fears and our responsibilities. Our courtship was quiet at first, late-night talks about books and music, long drives to places that felt like home because we could picture a future there. When we married, it felt less like a decision and more like a quiet surrender to a life we had both chosen, a life we could see ourselves growing into the space between sentences and Sunday mornings, the way a story grows when you keep turning the pages. We built a life that looked simple from the outside, a white picket fence, a tired cat who ruled the house with a purring decree, 2 kids who slept with the rhythm of a small, hopeful heartbeat, and a marriage that didn't shout but spoke in familiar, comforting tones. We debated about budgets and chores and the precise way to prepare a grilled cheese sandwich so that the cheese melts just right and the bread doesn't burn. We believed in the ordinary because we believed it was enough. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt sturdy, the sort of life you could lean on when the world pressed in from all sides. The first concrete sign that something wasn't right didn't arrive with drama. It didn't crash through the front door in a blaze of rage or make a spectacle in a crowded restaurant. It came as a slow, private erosion. The way her messages about work started containing fewer jokes and more timestamps, the way she grew reluctant to share the mundane details of her day with me, the way she began choosing late shifts and office dinners on nights when I could hear her through the thin walls, wrapping herself in excuses that felt rehearsed, polished, and not entirely true. It wasn't street-smart suspicion that warned me. It was a sorrowful, stubborn feeling that the person she had become, someone I could hear in her laughter and see in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, was not the person who had stood beside me through all the louder storms of life. I did what any husband who valued truth over comfort would do. I watched. I listened. I kept a careful ledger of what changed and when. I learned to quiet the louder, instinctual part of me, the part that wanted to roar or retaliate, and tried to listen to what the quiet part was trying to say. It wasn't a dramatic confession that arrived by telegram or in a candlelit room. It showed up in small, precise ways. A phone left unanswered on the kitchen table, a vase of fresh-cut flowers that didn't come from my garden, the way she hesitated when our eyes met in the hallway, and I saw something like fear, or maybe relief pass between us before she found a calm, practiced smile to mask it. The tipping point didn't come in one night, but in a few. A coworker at Jessica's office mentioned a man who had been seen at company events, a name she refused to acknowledge, a name she avoided with a straightening of the spine that looked almost like a physical effort. The rumor was not loud, it wasn't a soap opera. It was a thread pulled loose from a sweater and left to dangle and fray, and the more I tugged at it, the more loosed it grew, until the truth, which I had resisted naming, stood there with its undeniable weight. I confronted her in a place that felt as ordinary as any other place we had shared. The laundry room, a row of washers humming like patient beasts, a window that showed the street outside, and the small, ordinary lives that moved in and out of our line of sight. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was nothing that could be televised, nothing that could be mapped into a clever montage for social media or a peak young hearts drama. But it was real, and it was honest, and it was mine. "Who is he?" I asked, the question leaving my mouth not as a shout but as a careful cut, as if I were testing a fragile glass to see if it could still bear weight. Her head tipped, not with defiance, but with fear and an almost childlike honesty that looked out of place on someone who had lived with a pretend certainty for so long. Daniel, she whispered, the name landing between us like a single rain droplet hitting a pan of still water. Daniel. He was a name I had seen in the office's hallway, and in the occasional shared memory, they would recall with a smile that looked far too bright for the room. A former colleague who had once seemed safe, ordinary, non-threatening, a man who would never show up in the storytelling of our lives as the villain, but perhaps as something more complicated, something human and frail and longing for a connection that felt rare enough to deserve it. The confession did not blitz us into a new life with its thunder. It didn't demand a divorce, a courtroom, or a dramatic stand that would be captured by the city's gossip mill. It asked us, demanded really, to pause and listen, to acknowledge what had happened without turning it into a public spectacle. We talked. We talked for hours. In the kitchen with the light over the sink that always looked a little too bright at night, we talked in the living room where the kids' laughter used to float in from the other room like a sign of some simple music we could all share. We talked about what had drawn her away, about what she felt in those late-night hours when the house lay quiet and the only sound was the hum of the fridge, about what had made her think she needed something that our marriage wasn't giving her. The conversations did not begin with blame, but with a clear, stubborn honesty. We spoke about needs, about the fear of losing self in the process of being a wife or a husband, about the way loneliness can shape a person's choices when they feel unseen. Jessica admitted that she had felt unseen slowly, over a period of quiet days where the ordinary responsibilities of life pressed on her from all sides. Work, motherhood, the quiet, unspoken expectation to keep the family, the house, and the dream of stability intact while feeling like a ghost in her own life. She said she had mistaken the ache for something else, something she didn't allow herself to name, something she thought would vanish if she could just be bold enough to step away from a life that had become predictable and safe and somehow hollow. I listened with a careful, patient attention that felt almost like therapy of its own kind. It wasn't about punishing her, though the instinct to punish was there, sometimes quiet, and sometimes a raw, startling sound in my chest. It was about understanding what broke in order to fix what remained. We spoke about boundaries and boundaries broken, and then repaired with the strongest glue we could find: honesty. We spoke about the future we were willing to try to build together, not as two people who had never fought, but as two people who chose to fight for something beyond the easy comforts of habit. We did not set the clock back to a time before. The past remained, stubborn and loud, a map of potholes that would always exist on the road we walked. We could not pretend to forget, but we could choose how to walk forward, not as a pair who pretended nothing had happened, but as a pair who had chosen to carry the memory forward in a different posture. We enrolled in counseling together, a decision that did not belong to the world of melodrama, but to the simple, stubborn belief that some things take care, time, and the presence of a patient representative of our better natures to keep moving. The process did not immediately restore trust, as anyone who has lived through betrayal can tell you. Trust, once cracked, does not mend itself with a kiss and a toast or a cleverly crafted apology that sounds almost rehearsed. It takes time, and it takes an insistence on showing up in ways that are small but meaningful. We learned to replace the old rituals with new ones that could withstand the scrutiny of distance and habit. I began leaving notes, not as a detective marking clues, but as a person who wants to remind us both of our shared humanity. "I see you," one note would read, tucked into the coffee mug that had become our morning ritual. "I'm listening," another would say, placed on the fridge where we kept the day's to-do list. We created new patterns, not to forget, but to move forward. The children entered this new reality with their own cautious fear and curiosity. They were teenagers, not naive to the ways of adults, and not immune to the tremors of parental. I wanted to shield them from the worst of it, but also teach them the hardest lesson I knew. People you love will fail you, and you will fail them in ways you don't intend and can never truly apologize for in mere words. They deserved honesty rather than a glossy version of the truth. So I gave them as much as they could bear, with the care that comes from a parent who has learned that truth spoken softly can save a child from a hunger they didn't even know they carried. I told them that sometimes couples fight not because they are failing, but because they care enough to hold each other to a standard they both know they cannot reach on their own. I told them that adults are flawed, that forgiveness is not a trophy, but a discipline, and that what matters is not a pristine past, but a clarified future. I did not pretend to be free of the impulses that betrayed us. The old urge to expose, to write a piece that would scorch the sky and scorch someone else's life to prove a point, to paint Daniel as the villain in a blockbuster tragedy, remained in a quiet corner of me, a shadow self that believed justice could be served through a single public act. But I learned slowly that the strongest revenge is not a public accusation that can be used to win a battle or shatter a rival. The strongest revenge is to live an honest life in the aftermath of deceit, to show up for the people who still trust you, to prove that you are able to grow beyond the storm and to keep your promises even when the wind howls and the night grows long. I began to understand that revenge would only consume me if I let it. It would eat away at the part of me I'd always valued, the part that believed in quiet courage, in the stubborn persistence of doing what is right even when it is not easy, and in the simple act of showing up as a person who can bear his own imperfections as well as those of the ones he loves. So I stopped thinking of revenge as a weapon. I started thinking of it as a consequence to be faced, an inevitable, inescapable weight that would descend not on Jessica or Daniel or any other player in this drama, but on me if I let it win. My goal, if there was a goal at all, became the opposite of revenge. To become a man worthy of the life I was trying to salvage. To become a husband who can stand in the same room with the truth and not shrink away. To be a father who models accountability rather than hiding behind a mask of serenity that wasn't real. As time passed, our home began to bear the marks of that work. The walls still carried the faint scent of a past we could not forget, the anchors of a life that had been yanked away from its moorings and then re-anchored with new ropes. We found a rhythm again, not the same rhythm as before, but a trustworthy rhythm that could sustain the family through the mundane and the unpredictable that life tends to throw at you. There were mornings when the kids slept late and we found ourselves sitting at the kitchen table with coffee that tasted like something we had earned rather than something we took for granted. There were evenings when we walked through the neighborhood, not with the intent to escape, but with the intent to see each other clearly again, to observe how the other person's features had not changed as much as the interior life beneath them had. The whisper of fear that had once hovered over our marriage, the fear of exposure, the fear of losing each other forever, began to fade into something softer, something that felt almost like care for the person who still wore the same ring on their finger and carried the same names and memories. We learned to speak about doubt without letting it fracture us. We learned to say out loud and with conviction that our love was not something perfect but something persevering. That is not a grand cinematic confession. It is a choice we make every day, to stay and to try again, to apologize when we fall short, to forgive when the fault seems too big to forgive, to listen not with the goal of proving a point, but with the aim of understanding the quiet, unspoken needs that drive the actions we take. The line of revenge I once imagined to be a bright, dangerous blade, something I could brandish in a single moment to end a narrative, turned out to be a dull blade that cut only the user. It severed the clarity inside me, dulled the sense of what mattered, and left me hollow in the places I used to be full. The real power lay elsewhere, in the long, patient work of rebuilding trust, in the quiet acts of accountability, in the decision to become someone who could bear the truth long enough for healing to arrive. I'm not naive enough to pretend the past no longer affects us. It would be foolish to claim we can forget what happened and pretend life goes on as if nothing altered the course of our days. The memory remains. The memory is part of us. But memory is not a chain. Memory can be a guide. It can remind us what we almost forgot, that loyalty in a marriage is a choice you make every day, sometimes in the smallest of gestures. A kiss the cheek when you've walked in from a hard day. A shared look that says, we are still in this. A commonplace appointment kept because a promise was made that mattered more to you than your pride. We learn to honor the past not by clinging to it, but by letting it shape the present with quiet, careful intention. If you ask me, did you forgive Jessica? I would pause. Forgiveness isn't a single yes or no. It's a word that needs to be earned again and again, in small ways that accumulate into a life you can live with. And I would tell you that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It doesn't erase the memory of the pain, but it allows the present to exist alongside it. We learn to hold both, the hurt and the effort to heal at the same time, without pretending that the hurt will ever be completely wiped away. The point is not to pretend we are invincible or to pretend that the past never happened. The point is to allow a life to continue to grow around the truth of what occurred and to choose to invest in the future anyway. Along the way, Daniel drifted away from our story, not because of a grand moral falling out, but because life pulled him in directions that left him less central to the narrative that was now becoming ours again. He remained a person, not a villain, and his presence in our lives was not erased by the choices we made to move forward. I don't know what happened to him beyond the edges of our memory. That's not a moral judgment, just a record of how life unfolds. People come and go, sometimes leaving behind a trace that is a reminder of what could have gone differently, sometimes leaving no trace at all beyond the impact they left on others. Two more things endure from this chapter of our life. First, I learned again the value of humility. Humility is not the soft, polite cousin of truth. It is the willingness to admit you were wrong, to admit you have hurt someone you love, to admit you don't always know what you're doing, and that you're still learning how to live well. Second, I learned to tell the truth about what happened, even when it makes me vulnerable or unpopular. In a world where people love dramatic headlines and sensational endings, truth-telling can feel like a solitary act. But it is the only act that allows the other pieces to fit back into place, the only act that can protect a family when the appetite for judgment grows loud. If I had chosen to pretend that nothing happened or to rewrite the story as a cautionary tale about a scheming wife and a malevolent lover, I would have deprived us of the chance to become something stronger, something capable of surviving the daylight and the night in equal measure. Where we stand now is not a triumph, not a conquest, not even a dramatic resolution fit for a screen. It is more like a carefully tended garden after a winter that should have killed every plant. Some years the soil is thin and the growth slow. Some years a weed finds a way to creep up and surprise you with its resilience. There are days when Jessica and I still misunderstand the other's needs, and days when the old, quiet stubbornness that marks us both threatens to surge again. But we have learned how to talk through it, how to pause and listen, how to offer a hand before a demand, how to show up when the other person is not ready to be seen. We have learned to trust not because the past has disappeared, but because we have chosen to keep showing up for each other in spite of the past. If you're listening to this story, the one I'm telling in this voice that still feels like my own heartbeat, you might wonder what the point is. The point is not to celebrate a victory over a rival or to cast Jessica as a villain or Daniel as a scapegoat. The point is to tell the truth with the hope that truth itself will do some of the healing that the drama never could. The point is to demonstrate that a life, our life, can be altered by a terrible moment and then refashioned by a stubborn, persistent push toward honesty, responsibility, and care. The point is to show that revenge, while it might feel temporary and powerful in the moment of anger, is a poor barter for a life you still want to live with dignity.